welcome to History Lunch Break. My name is Glenn Perkins with the Greensboro History Museum. Always happy to have folks come spend a little of your lunch hour with us on a Friday. Today, I'm extra excited. We've got a fantastic guest. Stephen Bell is here. He is the American Indian Education Coordinator for Guilford County Schools. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Glenn. How are you?
I'm terrific, and thanks for spending some time with us, broadcasting from your office there to share a
Yeah.
little bit about what you're doing and what's up with Indigenous students and Indigenous heritage in the Guilford County Schools. First, I just wanted to, you're brand new here in this role pretty much, right?
I am. Yeah, I just started at the beginning of October. So it's quite an interesting time to start, not only just being in a pandemic, but also, Indigenous Peoples Day was October 11th. And then we had Native American Heritage Month coming in November. So it was, really starting to get the ground running. So it's been a lot, but it's been great to have so many different community partners and activists in Guilford County Schools to assist as well.
And coming back to Guilford County is coming back to Greensboro is coming back home for you, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I was born and raised here in Greensboro. My parents met at UNCG when they were in grad school, so they've been here ever since. I grew up here and then went to school at NC State, where I was there for 5 years, and then moved out to Oklahoma, where I was a middle school science teacher, taught there for 3 years. Loved the kids that I worked with, loved the families that I got to interact with. But I realized that what I loved about education, what I loved about teaching was getting to work with students, not just in a curriculum sense or teach them about protons, neutrons, and electrons, but hear about their life stories and help them navigate stressful situations or a relationship issue. I found that that's where I got most of my joy from, is being in the classroom and talking with students, even in between classes or after school. So upon realized that I wanted to go back to school to be a school social worker. So went to Washington University in St. Louis. They have a great MSW program, Masters of Social Work program, that's focused on Native American and Alaska Native communities. So graduated there and had an incredible cohort of Native social workers and public health professionals from around the country who are doing phenomenal things. Some in schools, some in policy, some in mental health. And then after that, moved back home to North Carolina. I worked as a school social worker in Wake County before this. And so came back to Greensboro and came home just in October. So I've been kind of quite around the Midwest and on the East Coast. So it's good to be back home.
It's good to have you back here. Now, when you grew up, now you're Lumbee, and when you grew up, did you have kind of a close association with that Lumbee identity here in Greensboro?
Yeah, so my family, most of my family, extended family, is in Robeson County, North Carolina, which is where our tribal community is, where the Lumbee community is. We have, I would go back and visit them from time to time. But we also have Guilford Native here in Greensboro since the 1970s. And so every year they held a powwow there here in Greensboro. And so, I would go with Dad almost every year to that powwow. And so would go to several different powwows and events throughout the community. But then also just, as I was raised, it was really challenging because my brothers and I were the only Native students in our school. And so we didn't always have the language growing up to know how to talk about what it meant to be Lumbee,
Hmm.
especially if people had never heard of our tribe before, or
Right.
didn't know that Native Americans still existed. It was kind of challenging for us to navigate that. So, just in terms of, staying connected to family, and staying connected to the community here, but just, our own existence as Native people. Um, as well. So my mom is not Native. I should clarify that.
Hmm.
So um, yeah, so I am biracial, but yeah, so my Native identity and Native culture is really important to me. It's something
Right.
that, as I've gotten older and gotten the language and seen how being connected to culture is so much more, is life-giving. It is helping us understand who we are. It's giving us language to be activists in our own community. It shows, even research has shown that connection to culture is such a uh, is a connection to mental health,
Hmm.
and shows benefits in social emotional wellness as well. So yeah, so I'm thankful for all of the folks that both who are here and no longer on the earth, who have shared stories with me and helped me be the person that I am today, because I couldn't be here without them. So
Well, that's great. If you're just joining us, this is History Lunch Break from the Greensboro History Museum. I'm Glenn Perkins, and I'm talking to Stephen Bell, who's the American Indian Education Coordinator at Guilford County Schools. If anybody has questions for Stephen, feel free to pop them in either into the Zoom chat or the Zoom Q&A if you're watching on Zoom. And if you're on the Facebook, you can throw something in the chat there and I'll try to see it. I'll do my best. So Stephen, you were just talking some about your own personal learning experience about your identity and connection to the Lumbee people. And I thought it was interesting, you sort of talk about how that was a learning thing, even that's an inherited tradition that you have, that it took sort of some study and some deliberateness on your part to really understand the depth of what that meant to you. And now I guess, is that one of your roles or one of your callings, I guess, in Guilford County Schools?
yeah, because so to kind of think back to how I was raised and my experience in education, in being one of the only Native students at my school and not seeing myself reflected in the curriculum or with the families that were at my school, it was really challenging to know, you know, how do I learn about my people? How do I learn about our history if I'm not being taught about this, or if it's not in our history books, right? So uh, I did have to take an initiative, right, to learn about um, different different events that happened in our history related to Native American people, not just Lumbee people. Uh, so I had to take an initiative there, and then think about how as I'm kind of carried into the work that I'm doing now, as I'm thinking about how do I support students, not just on an academic level, not just on a curriculum level, and making sure that our history is being told, but how do I support students who might feel isolated or might feel like their story is not being told similar to mine? How am I supporting students who don't feel like they're being represented? So on that mental health, social, emotional piece as well. So um, and then also, as a social worker, I'm thinking about it from so many different lenses too. How am I supporting families that don't feel like
Mhm.
they're being heard, right? I think about, just to use this analogy, like, how do you feel when you aren't invited to a party? How do you feel when you are, there's a gathering and you're left out, right? We all feel that that wanting to belong somewhere, right? We feel that wanting to, yeah, just be heard and represented and seen in an accurate way. And so, and when that doesn't happen, oftentimes that leads to disinterest. You're no longer wanting to connect with that group of friends anymore, right? It's the same thing that kind of relates to that analogy would work with education as well. If you're not seen, if you're not represented, it's really hard to engage with a school or a curriculum that doesn't accurately reflect who you are or what your family's told you is true. So I'm thinking about how I was raised, and I'm always constantly thinking about what would younger Stephen really want? What would younger Stephen really benefit from in this time? Especially in this pandemic too. It's been an interesting sort of layer as well. So
tell us a little bit about the Indigenous students that Guilford County Schools does serve.
Yeah. So I should probably clarify in terms of one question that I get is what's the right term that I'm supposed to use? Like, is Indigenous or is it Indian or is it American Indian, Native American? What is it? And I might have used every single term as I've been speaking with you. So one thing that I would just say is that all Native people are different, and they're going to have different positions on how they might feel about a specific word. So, you know, in sometimes, like for our elders, they've used Indian their entire life because that's what the government told them, and that's what their family used, and so to them that brings a lot of pride. And then sometimes that word can be offensive to some people because it's a word from the government, or it's a word that that colonizers used when they came over, and so just ask people whenever you're not sure what term to use. I personally prefer using your tribal name if you know it, or I'll use Indigenous or Native. So here in Guilford County, though, we have about 2,000 students who identify as American Indian, Native American, or Indigenous. We, from what we can tell so far, we have about 24 tribes represented. So the most common we see is Lumbee, which is my tribe, or the Okanichi, which is just one county over. In the Burlington, Alamance area is their tribal territory. So we have the most students from those tribes, but we have, I think, all 8 tribes from North Carolina represented. In addition, we also have non-recognized tribes that are represented as well. So like the Tuscarora are not recognized by the state or federal government, but they're still Indigenous students, and they still have a place here. And it's important that I'm advocating for them and elevating their voices as well. It's an interesting challenge too, because with 24 tribes represented, we also have folks from the Oglala Sioux tribe out in South Dakota. We have a few Navajo students from New Mexico, Arizona area. So it's a really interesting place because all Native people are different and all tribes are different. And so it's trying to think about, okay, how do I elevate all Native people's voices in a way that is accurate and speaks for and helps elevate all voices, and not just Lumbee people, or not just North Carolina Native people. So yeah, that's what Guilford County Native students and community looks like.
Yeah, and what a challenge too, because you have such a diversity of traditions, geographical regions, and so much, and you don't want to reduce them, right, to like a single kind of people. I mean, it goes back to kind of what you were talking about with the problems of even how to talk, how to identify a group that is such a diverse spectrum of people. And I know as you're trying to, do work with the students, it must be, keep you on your toes, certainly, to be able to differentiate between their their identities and their traditions, but also identify if there's specific needs that they have as a community, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, because even there are some, even thinking about, for myself growing up too, there are not just diversities in tribes, but then when you get to know individuals, there's some folks that are very active in their tribe in terms of staying connected culturally. There's some that know a lot about their history, know a lot about their heritage, and then there's some that maybe don't know a lot. Maybe they have been adopted by a family and they know they're native, but they don't
Mhm.
really know what tribe they're from, and they don't really know a lot about their teaching. So you have that, a vast spectrum of tribes, and you have a vast spectrum of people's and students' understanding of what Native American is, and their connection to our culture as well. So yeah, so it does keep me on my toes, but
Yeah.
I think it always keeping in mind that Native American people aren't just a monolith,
Mhm.
and keeping in mind that I can't speak for all Native people or uh, all Lumbee people or my whole family, right? How do I elevate instead the voices, instead of speaking for them?
And I think, and so that's also one of your, I guess, goals, right? At the schools is also to share not just with the students who have Indigenous heritage, but also with everybody else about some of the realities of the history of the Native peoples in the country and certainly our local region, right?
Right. Yeah. So there's always a tendency to look at, you know, when we think about what were you taught about Native history in schools, there's usually like the Trail of Tears, maybe the boarding schools, Columbus, um, and that's about it, right? And there's a lot more in the history, that's left out. There's also a lot more in about our culture than just those really dark times in history, right? That's something that I'm been trying to elevate with our Native American Heritage Month, is celebrating the different parts that aren't always talked about. So celebrating, our traditional food ways that we that are still used today. Thinking about Indigenous science. What were some of the things that Indigenous people did historically to navigate waterways, or to set up communities, or to set up governments? What were some ways that Native people used art as a way of expressing themselves? And so it's both trying to give a more accurate historical representation, but it's also about trying to um, talk about not just the trauma, but the joy as well. That I like to use that terminology, because that's also, when I think about a goal of mine in wanting to make sure that students are visibly that are they their culture is visible and accurate. You want to make sure that you're hitting on all of those things, and not just what's been passed down.
Right.
So
Yeah, you answered it a little bit, but one of our watchers here, Robert, was curious about the information or sources that you were using to introduce specifically tribes that are in our sort of region of the Piedmont, North Carolina, to students in the schools.
yeah, so there's a lot of online resources that are available. Our Guilford County Schools website for American Indian education. If you just search like GCS AIE, you should be able to find us that way. We have a list of a lot of curriculum resources that I have made available and collaborated with to make available for our teachers. And those are resources that are focused on sort of U.S. Native American history, but then also North Carolina history as well. Dr. Melinda Maynor Lowry is an incredible historian that has done a lot of research on specifically the Lumbee history. And so she's an elder and a historian that I lean on heavily as I think about specifically talking about Lumbee history.
Right.
And the great thing about this virtual space is that so many social media pages have been a great resource of sharing information, history. So I follow all of the tribes that have social media pages on Instagram and Facebook. And so I'm either resharing that just as a sort of some anecdotal ways of sharing that information, but then also having our website as well to disseminate that.
Yeah, and of course, this time of year, you get more of that information kind of bubbling up, thanks in part to it being sort of federally recognized as Native American Heritage Month. And I know you're doing some celebrations or observations from the school. You want to tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've started and are up to?
Sure. So, given that it was since I started so close to Native American Heritage Month, and not knowing how the district celebrated or recognized Native American Heritage Month, one of the things I wanted to do was collaborate with, in keeping with my goals of elevating voices, I wanted to collaborate with several Native families to put together several resources. And so I was thinking about how I've seen like the exercise challenges or like the plank challenge or the squat challenge, right? And so I was like, well, what would it look like if we were to put together something on a calendar similar to that, but it was focused on Native history. And there's a different aspect on each day. And so as I was talking with families, we kind of came up with this calendar that's on our website. And so this was shared with our departments, with our social studies and curriculum department. This was shared with our counselors and social workers that were then shared with the schools. And we also shared it on our social media pages. And it's actually been shared to a lot of different schools throughout the country, actually. I've gotten messages from people outside of the state that have said, wow, this is really helpful. I had never seen this before. And so this is all, the work of, this certainly wasn't just my doing. This was from several folks from our community who pitched in and sent me a video they had done, or gave me an idea of like, hey, have you thought about this, or given me feedback in any way. So I'm incredibly grateful for each one of them who lent a hand in this. So that was one of the challenges we've done. We're also trying to do, similar to like Humans of New York, we're trying to do a Natives of Guilford on social media pages. So I'm still getting some images and getting stories from folks. So it's taken a little bit to put that on our social media pages, but yeah, those are two of the things that I've focused on. I've also gone to a couple different schools and helped them either do like a celebration day, or helped them plan an event, or helped them craft a lesson to give them some ideas too. So those are just a few of the ways that we've used that and sort of use that to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. And our social media pages, you'll see we've also shared different events that are happening around North Carolina as well. So yeah, so those are some of the things we've done.
Yeah, I love that idea of the Guilfords of Native interviews, and just kind of using that as an opportunity to connect with people, and also to demonstrate to people that, oh my gosh, Native people are still in our community, here you are, and they're, leaders and inspiring us, in different ways, um, and really critical pieces of our city.
Right.
And I think it's such a great way, that's a one advantage that I can see, to social media, as a way to use that to connect people to those folks that they may not have thought about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've heard from so many students and talking with them is one of the big things they get is like, oh, well, you don't look native or you don't look like
Mhm.
Pocahontas or whatever. And it's like, okay, so how can we help educate them in a way that doesn't just say not all native people look the same, right?
Right.
And so that was another sort of reason that pushed like the natives of Guilford is like, well, if you go to our social media pages, you'll see a rainbow of folks that look different shades of brown to white to black,
Mhm.
who have different hair textures, who um, have different body structures. We don't all look the same. So that was another sort of push that brought to natives of Guilford, in addition to just helping students see themselves or see people from their community that have done incredible things. So.
Mhm. And have you had luck connecting to, both the tribal entities you mentioned within the state, and also some of the other statewide groups? I know North Carolina Museum of History in particular has done a lot with North Carolina tribes, and they're doing right now, right, their
Yeah.
annual celebration.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have had the opportunity to connect with, some universities who have American Indian centers, and then some tribes and admissions offices and
Mhm.
different organizations, and we've been sharing out some of each other's events and things like that, which has been really helpful. So organizations like the UNC American Indian Center has been an incredible resource that also has curriculum resources for
Mhm.
teachers. NICNAO, it stands for the North Carolina Native American Youth Organization. They're another great organization that's been around, I think, since the 70s or 80s, to support Native youth. And they have a very strong social media presence. And have events and conferences for students that I know our native students take advantage of. So those are just a few of those examples that we've connected with.
Um, it's really it's so interesting, again, the variety of resources and people. I know um, our education folks here at the museum just recently did a webinar series, working in part with some folks at UNC Pembroke about particular issues facing North Carolina natives right now. They call it Indigenous North Carolina.
Mhm.
It was a really interesting series to me. It was very illuminating about different issues.
Yeah.
Education was one of the topics, but also missing and murdered Indigenous women, as
Mhm.
well as
Mhm.
that sort of mascot problem, I guess, for lack of a
Right.
better word. Talking about the different issues. Do you see those issues as being relevant to the students that you've come in contact with so far?
I do, yeah. And I like the how your three series really all connect together when you think about mascots, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and Indian education, because yeah, we see how mascots and sort of this like fake portrayal of Native people um, sort of can lead to stereotypes that prevent folks um, from really understanding who Native people are, and really sort of objectifying Native people, which sort of gets into
Mhm.
the missing and murdered Indigenous women. It also sort of gets at, when you think about Halloween costumes and mascots, how they're often almost always Native women are sexualized as well.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, I definitely do see that, because then, here in schools, students, especially if they're, the only Native student in their class or in their school, they often have a assumption from their students or other adults that these mascot portrayals equal this is what the student is like. And so, yeah, so we do see that very often with our Indigenous students here.
That's really one of the benefits, I think, of looking deeply into history, I think, because it doesn't, it forces you not to be able to simplify things and say, oh, it was just this way, or people are just like that. You just realize that there's so much diversity to experience and different ways that people lived. So I appreciate, some of the work you're doing to try to promote that history through the challenge calendar and the other projects. I think those
Yeah,
will be really exciting
yeah.
going
Well, and
forward.
yeah, and it's only possible through, organizations who help elevate our voices as well, right? So I'm so grateful to have this time to speak with you and to share with anyone who's listening.
I got a couple more questions here from the chat. Rodna wants to know, did you get a chance to meet Yolanda Leecraft or Lonnie Revels when you were growing up? I know for folks who don't know, Lonnie Revels was the first city council person here in Greensboro of Native descent. And also was one of the he was one of the founders, right, of the Guilford Native American.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Did meet Lonnie Revels, and have not had the chance to meet Yolanda Leecraft. Um, but yeah, I want to make sure that I speak to how grateful I am for those who came before me, for Indian Ed coordinators before me, for Guilford Native for advocating for my position, who went through the trenches to get this started, to advocate for this position, because, before this position started, Guilford County Schools had a 95% dropout rate for our Native students. And that's just unacceptable, but given, what I had shared earlier, it makes sense when you don't see yourself represented. Why am I invested in this? Why should I try? Right. So, yeah, so I'm very grateful to the two of them and many others who came before me. So.
Yeah, and I think Greensboro is sort of lucky and unique in some ways to have this urban Native association that really is a uniter for different tribal affiliations and tribal connections for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Stephen, I think our time's about up. Do want to thank you for spending a little time with us here on a Friday, and hope that your celebration, observation, and recognition of Native American Heritage Month goes on and continues well for the rest of this month. And we'll look forward to talking about some more of these topics. Again, not just November. We can talk about them year round. So we're looking forward to all kinds of exciting connections with you in your new work there at the Guilford County Schools.
Yeah, I'm happy to help anytime. Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed speaking with you, and I look forward to continuing to work with y'all.
Well, thanks again very much, Stephen Bell from Guilford County Schools. This is going to be, I guess, History Lunch Break's going on a little bit of a holiday hiatus for the next few weeks, but we will be back at the beginning of the new year with all kinds of new topics for always looking for interesting people, talk about interesting parts of history related to Greensboro and beyond. Our education folks do have another webinar series coming up. If you were interested in the Indigenous in North Carolina webinar series, there's another series coming up in December, Holocaust Education. It's sort of inspired in part by the North Carolina Women's Holocaust Memorial that is going in at LeBauer Park. So there are 3 programs for some fascinating speakers talking about the Holocaust and its healing and other kinds of associations here in Greensboro and beyond. So those are going to be Tuesdays, the first 3 Tuesdays in December. So do check our website for those programs. Again, we'll look forward to seeing you guys back on Fridays in January for more History Lunch Break. In the meantime, thanks again, Stephen.
Thanks, Glenn.
And thank you guys for watching.